The sun had just begun to set over the rugged landscape of the distant planet, casting long shadows across the rocky terrain. The air was thick with tension. A team of human hunters, led by Ethan Cole, crouched behind a set of bushes, their eyes scanning the area with sharp focus. They were on a mission to capture or eliminate a group of alien beasts that had been terrorizing nearby settlements. The reports had been vague. Some said the creatures were massive. Some said they could disappear into thin air. But there was one thing they all agreed on. These monsters were dangerous. Ethan adjusted his weapon, a high-tech rifle designed for long-range precision. His team of 5 hunters was well prepared. They had set up traps in strategic locations, hoping to catch the creatures off guard. They had studied the terrain for days, mapping out every cave, every hideout where the creatures might be lurking. They were professionals, trained for this kind of hunt. But as Ethan peered through the scope of his rifle, he couldn't shake the uneasy feeling gnawing at him. Something didn't feel right. There were no signs of the usual animal tracks, no fresh scents in the air. The only movement in the distance was the wind whipping through the dry grass. "Stay alert," Ethan whispered to his team, his voice low. "Something's off." The others nodded silently, their faces hard with concentration. A few of them exchanged nervous glances. They had heard the stories, of course. The tales of the monsters that roamed this planet. Beasts so vicious, so terrifying, that entire villages had been wiped out in the blink of an eye. But as the team waited, hour after hour, it seemed more like a ghost story than reality. Then suddenly, the trap they had set in a nearby ravine was triggered. The team's eyes went wide. Ethan's heart skipped a beat. "Got something," one of the hunters said, voice tense. Ethan motioned for the team to move quickly. They crept toward the ravine, their footsteps barely making a sound. Their rifles were ready, their senses heightened. They reached the edge of the trap, expecting to find a massive, snarling creature caught in the netting. But when they peered down, their jaws dropped in shock. Instead of a beast, 2 figures lay tangled in the trap, figures that looked very much like humans. But they weren't human, Ethan could tell by their features. They had strange, glowing eyes, sharp angular faces, and skin that shimmered with an almost metallic sheen. One of them had long, silvery hair, and the other had skin that seemed to change color with every movement. For a moment, Ethan and his team stood frozen, unsure of what to do. The figures were breathing heavily, their bodies bruised and battered. But they were clearly alive, and they were not monsters. "What the hell are they?" one of the hunters muttered, his voice shaky. Ethan didn't answer right away. He crouched down, examining the 2 alien girls more closely. Their eyes flickered with fear, and their bodies trembled. They looked more like they had been caught in a trap of their own, not the monsters they had expected to find. They were frightened, but not dangerous. Their eyes met Ethan's, and the silent plea for help was clear. "They're not what we thought," Ethan said, his voice low but firm. "They're not the beasts we were hunting." The other hunters exchanged confused looks. "Then what are they?" one of them asked, still eyeing the girls warily. Ethan's mind raced. He had no answers, but he did know one thing. They couldn't just leave them here. Not like this. They were clearly in need of help, but the last thing they needed was to draw attention. "We need to get them back to the ship," Ethan said quickly. "We'll figure this out there." The team was hesitant, their eyes still locked on the 2 alien girls. But Ethan's voice was calm and commanding. They had a mission to complete, and this wasn't it. The creatures they had been hunting were still out there, but now they had new, unexpected priorities. The team worked together to carefully extract the alien girls from the trap. They were weak, struggling to stand, but they didn't resist. Ethan could see the relief in their eyes as they were helped to their feet. They were scared, but not of the hunters. They looked like they had been through something much worse. As they made their way back to the ship, the eerie quiet of the landscape pressed in on them. There was no sign of the beasts, but now A new question hung in the air. What were these alien girls doing here? And what had they been running from? Ethan's gut told him that the hunt had only just begun. The air inside the ship's medical bay was cool, the soft hum of the life support system creating a strange contrast to the chaos of the hunt. Ethan stood by the door, watching the two alien girls. They had been placed on separate beds, their bodies weak from exhaustion and injury. The dim light above flickered occasionally, adding to the eerie stillness of the room. The team was gathered around, but no one spoke for a moment. The room felt heavy with questions. They had come to this planet expecting to find monsters to eliminate, yet they had found something far more unexpected. These alien girls weren't beasts. They were terrified, exhausted, and confused. But they were not human. Ethan's mind raced. He couldn't help but wonder who or what these girls really were. Where had they come from? Why were they here? And what had they been running from? There were more questions than answers, and with each passing second, the situation seemed stranger. One of the hunters, Ben, paced near the door, arms crossed tightly across his chest. "I don't get it," he muttered. "We were sent here to take care of a monster problem, not to babysit alien prisoners. What are we supposed to do with them now?" Ethan glanced at him, his expression calm but serious. "We don't know what's going on yet. We need more answers." At the far side of the room, the two alien girls lay still, their eyes closed. They had been examined, their injuries treated, but they still hadn't spoken much. They seemed too weak, too frightened, to engage. But then one of them stirred. The girl with the silver hair opened her eyes slowly, her glowing pupils locking onto Ethan's. Her gaze was intense but tired, as though the weight of everything she had endured was pressing down on her. She tried to sit up, but winced in pain and quickly lay back down. Ethan moved toward her, his steps careful and measured. "You're safe now," he said gently, trying to reassure her. His voice was calm, though uncertainty lingered in his mind. He wasn't sure how to communicate with her, but he had to try. "We'll figure out what happened. Just rest for now." The girl's lips parted as though she wanted to speak, but no words came out at first. Then, in a voice that was soft and almost broken, she spoke in a language Ethan couldn't understand. Her words were sharp, fast, and full of emotion. The tone was one of desperation, but the meaning was lost on him. "We don't understand," Ethan said, his brow furrowing. "Can you speak in our language?" The girl's eyes flickered with something that might have been recognition. She looked at Ethan for a long moment, as if deciding how much she could trust him. Then, with great effort, she spoke again, her words slow and careful. "Not monsters," she whispered. "Not dangerous." Ethan leaned in closer, his curiosity piqued. "You're not monsters?" he asked, repeating her words. The girl nodded faintly, her face a mask of pain and fear. "Not monsters." She paused, then added in a broken version of the human language. "Escape. Escape from them." Ethan's mind raced. Escape from whom? He exchanged a glance with his team, but no one had an answer. The mystery was growing deeper by the minute. Another of the girls, the one with the color-changing skin, stirred as well. She opened her eyes, her gaze darting nervously around the room before settling on Ethan. Unlike the first girl, she didn't speak right away. Instead, she looked at her companion, and then back at Ethan, as though silently asking permission to speak. Ethan gave a small nod, encouraging her to continue. She took a deep breath. Then, in a softer, almost fearful voice, she said, "Please, we need help." Her words were shaky, but there was a quiet strength behind them. "Not what you think. They made us prisoners." The room was silent for a long moment. The hunters exchanged looks, each one processing the information in their own way. These alien girls weren't what they had expected. They weren't monsters. They weren't threats. They were victims. Victims of something much worse. Who made you prisoners? Ethan asked, his voice steady but filled with concern. Who did this to you? The silver-haired girl's eyes filled with fear as she looked down at her hands, her voice trembling as she spoke. The ones who hunt, the ones who take, our kind. She shuddered, her face twisting with a mixture of anger and fear. They use us. Take what they want. Ethan's stomach turned. His worst fear was beginning to form in his mind. These girls weren't just random victims. They had been captured, experimented on, and used for whatever cruel purpose their captors had in mind. Whoever these monsters were, they were far more terrifying than anything Ethan and his team had imagined. The girl with the color-changing skin reached out weakly, her hand trembling. Please, she whispered, don't let them. Take us back. Ethan's heart sank. He knew they couldn't let these girls fall into the hands of whoever had hurt them. But the questions kept piling up. Who were these captors? And how far were they willing to go to get their prisoners back? Ethan's mind was already racing with the next steps. But one thing was clear. The hunters had to protect these alien girls, no matter what. They had been trapped in a nightmare, and now it was up to the humans to make sure they didn't fall back into it. The next few days aboard the ship were tense. The crew, usually calm and collected, found themselves on edge. They had been sent to capture monsters, but instead they had rescued 2 alien girls, victims of something much more sinister. The questions kept building, with no answers in sight. Ethan spent most of his time in the ship's control room, staring at the stars outside, lost in thought. The alien girls had been quiet for the past few hours, recovering from their injuries. But there was something in the air, a sense of urgency. Ethan knew the longer they stayed on the planet, the more danger they would be in. Whoever had been hunting these girls would come looking for them. Do you think they'll come for us? Ben asked, his voice tense as he leaned against the doorway. Ethan didn't look up from the viewport. I don't know, he said quietly. But I have a feeling we haven't seen the worst of it yet. The silence that followed was heavy. The hunters had never expected this mission to turn into a rescue operation, but now that it had, there was no going back. They were in this whether they liked it or not. Suddenly, the door to the control room slid open, and one of the alien girls walked in. It was the one with the silver hair, and she looked different now. Her injuries were mostly healed, and though she still had a look of fear in her eyes, there was a new sense of determination about her. Ethan stood up, surprised by her sudden appearance. What is it? He asked, his voice soft but firm. The girl, her eyes still glowing faintly, stood in front of him, almost as if she were waiting for him to make the first move. After a moment, she spoke in broken human language, her voice still soft but more confident. We have to leave this place. They will come. They will find us. Ethan felt a chill run down his spine. The urgency in her voice was clear. They didn't have much time, but there was still so much they didn't know. Who will come? Ben asked, stepping forward. Who are they? The girl hesitated, her eyes darting to the others in the room before returning to Ethan. They are not like you, she said, her voice shaky but insistent. They are not human. They are hunters. Ethan frowned. Hunters. You mean the ones who captured you? She nodded slowly, her face tightening with the weight of her memories. They take us. They use us for their own needs. Ethan clenched his fists. The pieces of the puzzle were starting to come together, but it didn't make any sense. Who were these beings? And why had they been hunting these girls? What do they want from you? He asked. The girl's expression turned darker, and she seemed to shrink back a little. They want control. They want to break us. Ethan's jaw tightened. It was clear that whatever these hunters were, they were no ordinary creatures. But just how dangerous were they? And how far would they go to get their captives back? We need to get away from here, she said urgently. They can find us anywhere. The ship, it won't hide us. Ethan shook his head. We can't just run. We need more information. Who are they? Where are they from? The girl opened her mouth as though to answer, but she faltered, her expression going blank, as though something was holding her back. She glanced over her shoulder as if sensing something or someone nearby. She began, her voice trailing off. I don't know how much time we have. The tension in the room thickened. Ethan felt the hairs on the back of his neck stand up. The ship was well hidden on a remote part of the planet. But if these hunters were as relentless as the girl suggested, they would find them eventually. And then what? Before Ethan could ask anything more, the ship's communication system beeped loudly. A warning light flashed on the console in front of him, signaling an incoming transmission. Ethan's heart skipped a beat. Could it be them? He quickly moved to the console, his fingers dancing across the controls as he accessed the transmission. The screen flickered, and a strange, distorted figure appeared on the monitor. The creature was humanoid, but its features were twisted, almost inhuman. It was covered in dark, shiny armor, and its eyes glowed with an unnatural intensity. Human hunters, the creature's voice crackled, rough and cold. You have taken what is not yours. Ethan froze. This was no ordinary message. Whoever this was, they were more than just a threat. They were an army. The alien girl gasped and took a step back, her eyes wide with fear. It's them, she whispered. They found us. The figure on the screen didn't wait for a response. Release the prisoners, it said, its voice filled with menace, or we will come for you. The transmission cut off, and the screen went black. The room was silent, the air thick with dread. Ethan turned to the team, his face hard with determination. They know we have them. We have to act fast. Get ready for anything. The alien girl who had warned them spoke again, her voice trembling but resolute. You can't outrun them. You must fight. Ethan knew she was right. The hunters were now the hunted. The only question was, how long could they survive against something so relentless, so dangerous? The tension aboard the ship was unbearable. Ethan stood at the command center, his fingers gripped tightly around the controls as he stared at the display in front of him. The alien transmission had left him unsettled. Whoever these creatures were, they weren't just after the alien girls. They were after everyone on the ship. All right, listen up, Ethan called out, his voice steady but commanding. He turned to face the crew, who had gathered around the central table. Their faces were grim, each of them fully aware of the threat that was now closing in on them. We don't know exactly what we're up against, but we do know one thing. They're coming. We need to be prepared. Ben, the sharp-eyed hunter who had always been the first to face danger, nodded. We'll get ready. But what's the plan? We can't fight an entire army without knowing more about them. Ethan glanced at the alien girl who had spoken to him earlier. She was standing near the door, her eyes wide with fear, but there was also something else in them. Determination. She wasn't going to let these hunters take her again. She had already been through too much. We need more intel, Ethan said. We can't just wait for them to show up. There must be something we can use to our advantage. The girl stepped forward, her voice soft but urgent. They are strong. They do not show mercy. But there is a place, a hidden place, where they keep their weapons. If you can find it, you can stand a chance. Ethan raised an eyebrow. A hidden place. Where? The girl looked down for a moment, collecting her thoughts. The caves, beneath the surface of the planet. They have a stronghold there. It's not far, but it's dangerous. You cannot go alone. The idea of venturing into a dangerous cave system to find the enemy's weapons was risky, but it was their best shot. They couldn't afford to sit idly by and wait for the enemy to attack first. How do we get there? Ben asked, his eyes narrowing. And how do we know we won't be walking straight into a trap? The girl hesitated. You won't be alone, she said quietly. There are others who can help you, but you have to hurry. Ethan turned to the team. We move out at dawn. We're going to need supplies, and we'll need to move quickly. Stay sharp. This won't be easy." As the crew began preparing for their mission, Ethan's mind wandered back to the alien girl's words. There are others who can help. Who were these others? And why hadn't they spoken up earlier? It wasn't long before the ship began to hum, signaling that the night was coming to an end. Ethan had barely slept, his thoughts consumed by what lay ahead. The enemy wasn't just a threat to the alien girls. They were now a direct threat to the entire crew. The idea of facing them head-on was terrifying, but there was no other choice. The next morning, the team gathered in the briefing room. They had packed supplies, weapons, and anything else they might need for the dangerous trek through the caves. The alien girl who had given them the warning was now standing at the front, her face grim but determined. "I will guide you," she said. "But remember, they are always watching." Ethan nodded. "We'll be careful. Stay close to us." The group set out, heading toward the planet's surface. The hunters crouched down, moving as quietly as possible. They didn't know how the enemy tracked them, but the girl's warning was enough to make them wary of every step. They made their way deeper into the dense forest, keeping their eyes peeled for anything out of place. Finally, they reached the entrance of the caves, hidden beneath thick overgrowth. The opening was narrow and dark, the perfect place to hide. Ethan signaled for the team to follow him inside, and one by one, they disappeared into the shadows. The further they went, the darker it became. The air was thick with moisture, and the walls of the cave seemed to close in around them. Every footstep echoed in the silence, and Ethan couldn't shake the feeling that they were being watched. Suddenly, a loud crash echoed from behind them. The ground trembled, and the walls shook. Ethan's heart raced. He spun around, his hand reaching for his weapon. But it was too late. The enemy had found them. From the shadows, dark figures emerged. They were tall, armored beings, their eyes glowing with an unsettling light. Their movements were swift and precise, like a well-oiled machine. There was no hesitation in their attack. They were here to eliminate anyone who stood in their way. "Stay back," Ethan shouted, raising his weapon. But it was clear that their enemies were ready for a fight. The armored beings advanced with terrifying speed, and the battle for survival had begun. The alien girl who had led them to the caves backed away, her eyes wide with fear. "I warned you," she whispered. "I warned you." Ethan gritted his teeth and aimed at the approaching enemy, knowing that this was only the beginning. The first attack had come, and there was no turning back now. The moment the enemy advanced, everything became chaos. Ethan's heart pounded in his chest as he raised his weapon, trying to focus on the approaching figures. The hunters were not like anything he had faced before. Tall, armored, and swift, with glowing eyes that seemed to pierce the darkness of the cave. "Stay back," Ethan yelled, but his voice barely cut through the noise of the crashing footsteps. The team quickly spread out, using the cave's natural formations for cover, but the enemy was relentless. There was no room to retreat. Ben, always the first to act, fired his weapon at one of the armored creatures. The shot hit its chest, but the creature barely flinched. It was as if the weapon had no effect at all. It charged forward with terrifying speed. "Not working," Ben shouted, trying to reload quickly. "We need to hit it harder." Ethan didn't waste any time. He signaled for the team to fall back further into the cave, but the path was narrow, and the walls seemed to close in around them. They had to move quickly, or they'd be trapped. The alien girl who had led them to the caves stood at the front, her glowing eyes wide with fear, but also determination. She was silent, her body tense, as she watched the battle unfold. They don't feel pain. The rest of the team took their cue and began firing. The creatures, now disoriented, were no longer moving with the same terrifying speed. Their armor was still tough, but the high-frequency disruptor had caused a glitch in their systems, making them vulnerable. One by one, they fell to the ground, their glowing eyes fading. But there were still more of them. Ethan could see more figures advancing from the deeper darkness of the cave. It was only a matter of time before the cave became overwhelmed. "We need to finish this," Ethan yelled. "Fall back. We need to find the weapons," the girl mentioned. The alien girl, still standing near the entrance, nodded silently. "Follow me," she said, her voice steady. She turned and led the way deeper into the cave, her glowing eyes cutting through the darkness like a beacon. The team followed closely behind, moving as quickly as possible while still keeping an eye on their attackers. The battle raged on behind them, but there was no time to look back. They had a chance to survive, but it was slipping away with every passing second. The deeper they went into the cave, as the creatures advanced, Ethan and his team moved into position, forming a tight circle. The weapons in their hands glowed with energy, and the team fired in unison, creating a barrage of beams that filled the air with light. One by one, the creatures fell, but more kept coming. The tunnel seemed endless, and no matter how many they defeated, there were always more. Ben's voice crackled through the comms. "We can't keep this up forever. We need to find the source of their power." The alien girl's eyes widened. "The source, it's in the heart of the cave, but it's guarded by the strongest of them all." Ethan nodded, his jaw set in determination. "Then we head for the heart." With the creatures closing in on them, the team fought their way forward, taking down wave after wave of the armored hunters. Each shot felt like it was their last, but their new weapons held strong. Their enemies, despite their power, were no match for the concentrated force of the human ingenuity and technology now in their hands. They finally reached a large open chamber deep within the cave. The walls were covered with strange, glowing markings, and at the center stood a massive stone altar. The air was thick with an unnatural energy that made the hairs on the back of Ethan's neck stand up. This was the heart of the cave, the source the alien girl had spoken of. But as they entered the chamber, a loud, bone-chilling roar echoed through the room. The ground beneath their feet shook violently as a colossal figure stepped out from the shadows. It was the largest of the hunters, twice the size of any they had faced before, its eyes glowing a deep red. Ethan felt a chill run down his spine. This was it, the final battle. The creature lunged at them with terrifying speed, its claws swiping through the air. Ethan barely dodged in time, rolling to the side as the creature's massive paw slammed into the stone floor. The impact left cracks in the ground, and dust billowed into the air. Ben fired first, his weapon unleashing a powerful blast, but the creature barely flinched. It growled, its red eyes narrowing as it turned toward him, its sharp teeth gleaming. "We can't kill it like this," Ben shouted. "We need to hit it in the core." The alien girl, her eyes filled with fear, pointed toward the altar. "That's where the core is. It's the only way to stop them." Ethan nodded, understanding the risk. "Cover me," he said, as he sprinted toward the altar, dodging the creature's strikes as best as he could. The beast followed, its massive frame moving quickly despite its size. Ethan reached the altar and quickly found the glowing core embedded in the stone. He didn't have time to hesitate. He aimed his weapon at it and fired, the shot hitting the core with a brilliant burst of energy. For a moment, nothing happened. But then, the entire cave seemed to tremble, as if the ground itself was reacting to the destruction of the core. The massive hunter let out an agonized scream as it staggered backward, its body writhing in pain. The creature's eyes flickered, the glow slowly fading until it collapsed to the ground. Motionless, the remaining hunters paused, confused, their attention turning to the fallen beast. "This is our chance," Ethan yelled, gesturing for his team to move. The enemy was weakening. With one final push, the team unleashed everything they had left, their weapons glowing brightly as they fired at the remaining creatures. One by one, the hunters fell, their bodies collapsing under the intensity of the onslaught. And then, as quickly as it had begun, the battle ended. The cave was silent, the last of the creatures lying defeated on the ground. Ethan's heart pounded in his chest, but he allowed himself a moment to breathe. They had done it. The alien girl, her expression softening, stepped forward. "Thank you," she said, her voice filled with relief. "You have freed us." Ethan looked around at his team. They had survived. Against all odds, they had won. But as they made their way back out of the cave, he knew this was only the beginning. They had faced the monsters, but the war was far from over. The air felt different now, as if the very atmosphere had shifted. The battle was over, and the team stood in the aftermath, breathing heavily but victorious. The dark cavern around them, once alive with the sounds of battle, now echoed with silence. The only sounds left were the distant drips of water and the hum of the team's weapons slowly powering down. Ethan surveyed the scene. The alien girl who had led them to this place stood beside him, her eyes full of gratitude. She had been their guide, their ally in a world so different from theirs. Now, they had won her freedom, and the monsters that once ruled this cave were gone. "We did it," Ben said, his voice weary but filled with a sense of accomplishment. "I didn't think we would make it, but we did." Ethan nodded, looking out at the remains of the defeated creatures. It wasn't just the weapons. It was teamwork. We trusted each other, and we fought together. That's what made the difference. The alien girl stepped forward, her gaze meeting Ethan's. "You've done more than just defeat the monsters," she said, her voice soft but firm. "You've freed us, and now I can help you." Ethan raised an eyebrow. "Help us? How?" The girl's eyes sparkled with determination. "I know more about the creatures, about the world they come from. They weren't the only ones. There are others out there, bigger, stronger, and more dangerous. But you don't have to face them alone. I can show you how to fight them, how to defend your planet." The words hung in the air. Ethan thought about what she had said. The battle had been hard, but it had proven one thing. Humanity could survive against these monsters. And if what the alien girl said was true, they would need to be ready for more. "We're not just fighting for our survival anymore," Ethan said slowly. "We're fighting for the future of Earth." The team gathered around, listening as the alien girl explained everything she knew. She spoke of the larger forces at play, of alien empires that viewed Earth as nothing more than a resource to be controlled. She told them of the many worlds that had fallen under the influence of these forces, where the inhabitants had been enslaved, ruled by fear and oppression. But she also spoke of hope. "You've shown that humanity is not like the others. You have the will to fight, to survive, and to protect what's yours. That is something they can't take away." Ethan's mind raced with possibilities. The alien girl was right. They had only just begun to scratch the surface of what lay beyond their world. The knowledge she held could be the key to preparing for what was coming next. "We have to act fast," he said, turning to his team. "We need to gather resources, get the word out, and start organizing. If there's a war on the horizon, we need to be ready." Ben nodded. "You're right, but we'll need help. We can't do this alone." The alien girl smiled, her eyes gleaming with a mixture of sadness and hope. "You won't have to. I'll help you find others, allies who have fought the same battles. Together, we'll stand a chance." The group began to move, leaving the cave behind them. They had won this battle, but they knew that the war was far from over. They had their work cut out for them. But with the alien girl's guidance, they were more prepared than ever before. As they walked out into the daylight, Ethan felt a sense of purpose he hadn't felt before. The Earth he knew was changing. The threats they had faced were only the beginning, but they weren't helpless anymore. They were a team, united by a common goal. And with that thought, the future didn't seem so uncertain. The team reached the edge of the forest, where a shuttle was waiting for them. The alien girl climbed aboard first, and Ethan followed, his mind already planning their next move. There was much to be done. They would need to alert the governments, rally the people, and prepare for what was coming. They had proven that humanity could stand up to the alien forces, but now They had to take the fight to the next level. As the shuttle lifted off the ground, soaring into the sky, Ethan looked out the window. The Earth was beautiful from up here, peaceful and calm. But he knew that peace could be shattered in an instant. The alien forces were still out there, and their eyes were set on Earth. But they weren't going to give up. They had already shown the strength of humanity, and they would continue to fight for their future. The journey ahead wouldn't be easy, but with each other by their side, there was nothing they couldn't face. And so, with a renewed sense of purpose and determination, they prepared for the battles yet to come. Humanity's fight for survival had only just begun.